As for myself, I have deep conviction in Madhyamaka. It is more than just belief. Relying on these teachings has shaped my understanding and the way I respond to the changes of life. Through the blessings of the lineage masters, I have experienced many inconceivable benefits. The supreme, profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered even in a million eons. Now that I see, hear and uphold it, I vow to realize the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all sentient beings. Please give rise to the supreme and extraordinary bodhicitta. Today I am preparing to begin teaching you the Entering the Middle Way, composed by Master Chandrakirti. Regarding this Entering the Middle Way, I actually taught it many times in the early days. However, it has been a long time since I last taught it. I have wanted to share it with you on many occasions, but the conditions never quite came together until now. So this year I would like to offer a concise explanation of the original text of Entering the Middle Way, and primarily refer to the commentary by Khenpo Tepa to provide a straightforward interpretation for everyone. I think most of you are basically aware that if you are studying Madhyamaka, root verses of the Middle Way, 400 stanzas on the Middle Way, and Entering the Middle Way are three exceptionally important treatises. Of course, for those who haven't studied Madhyamaka, this might seem like just any other book that doesn't offer much inspiration. As for myself, I have deep conviction in Madhyamaka. It is more than just belief. Relying on these teachings has shaped my understanding and the way I respond to the changes of life. Through the blessings of the lineage masters, I have experienced many inconceivable benefits. That's why, back when I first became a monk, I dedicated a vast amount of time to studying Madhyamaka. During that period, our truly great masters were still with us, including His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche and Khenpo Tepa, among others. They were all still present in the world, and so I was able to receive their methods for explaining Madhyamaka. While fully mastering the profound meaning can be quite difficult, regardless of that, I have a deep, joyful interest in Madhyamaka. In recent years, I have heard that our fellow practitioners and Buddhist friends are not only studying the words of my perfect teacher and other relatively simple teachings, but a significant number of people also have faith in the Madhyamaka teachings, such as root verses of the Middle Way. Many have even taken the initiative to gather and study together. This is truly very meaningful. Therefore, my main goal this time is to teach you the Madhyamaka treatise, Entering the Middle Way. On the surface, the verses of Entering the Middle Way and its commentaries don't seem particularly long. In reality, however, a vast ocean of teachings converged into one. Consequently, if we want to truly understand it, it is not simple at all. In the Tibetan tradition, there are over 100 different commentaries, and for Entering the Middle Way alone, there are so many. Every school of Tibetan Buddhism studies it, and their perspectives are quite diverse. In fact, if we have the time, it is indeed necessary to set aside many worldly distractions and deeply contemplate these Madhyamaka teachings. It is incredibly meaningful for one's life. Personally speaking, I have taught this many times before. Back when I first arrived in 1985, around 1986, I was mainly focusing on memorization. Later, His Holiness also taught the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way, and I studied it very diligently. Afterward, during a Dharma assembly, Khenpo Tepa came to participate at the academy. Several of us Khenpos listened to his teachings. After 1987, I began giving explanations to both Chinese and Tibetan students. Around 1990, I explained the verses of Entering the Middle Way. Later, I taught Master Tsongkhapa's Illuminating the Intent. I believe I taught one part first, then went to India and continued upon my return. By 1992, following Mipham Rinpoche's outline, I produced my very first translation. That is to say, the outline for Entering the Middle Way was my first ever work as a translator. It was the first time I did a translation. Looking back at that work last year, I can see now that in many ways the phrasing was quite flawed, yet it feels like a piece of history. Beginning the translation in that manner back then represents the thoughts and the context of that time. So I have chosen to keep it as it is. As for my own journey, particularly back in 1989, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche traveled to Beijing. I had hoped to join him, but things didn't work out. Since I couldn't go, I stayed behind at the academy and gave teachings to a small group of Tibetan monks on Entering the Middle Way and the commentary on the adornment of the Middle Way, as well as the treatise on Dispelling Doubts by Danshul and the Sunlight of Debate. At that time, I felt I had consulted a wide variety of Madhyamaka texts, especially from the Sakya, Gelug, and Nyingma schools. I was leafing through all these perspectives, and in the process of studying them, I found them to be incredibly inspiring. Sometimes I think back, we were just like the passionate youth today. Back then, whenever Madhyamaka was mentioned, everyone would be filled with such profound confidence. Whether it was through research or dialogue, our exchanges were extremely intense and lively. During those classes I taught, there were several monks who had just recently arrived. Today, they have become truly remarkable masters here at the Academy. So, for me personally, in those early days, I spent a lot of time studying Entering the Middle Way and taught it to others quite frequently. However, after 1994, as far as I can recall, I basically stopped teaching it. It has been nearly 30 years since I last lectured on it. A few years ago, I began translating Khenpo Tepa's commentary. In my opinion, this particular commentary is neither too extensive nor too brief. Most importantly, Khenpo managed to articulate the major debates and critical issues with a remarkable, effortless clarity. It is vital to establish a clear view based on our own lineage. I'm not saying this simply to praise him because he was my teacher. I believe when discussing Madhyamaka, there is absolutely no need for that. But I will be quite frank. Among the commentaries on Entering the Middle Way available today, some are too wordy, while others are too vague. Explaining the most essential principles using Mifam Rinpoche's outline is by no means an easy task. This is no small feat. That's why I've translated it this time to share it with all of you. Are the insights within it really that profound? You are all wise and discerning, and you will know once you examine them. Khenpo primarily relied on the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way, using very accessible and clear language to explain the meaning of entering the middle way. This is of great importance. Later, around 2017, I also used a 3-session series to discuss the essential principles of the treatise while giving the oral transmission to everyone. Then there is another way to approach this work. Master Chandrakirti also wrote the clear words. I spent a vast amount of time translating it into Chinese, and it was published as well. By mentioning all this, it's not to say, I've studied this, so you should too. Look at how much I've done. That's not my intention. I don't mean it that way. Even though I haven't taught it in a while, and it's been some time since I lectured on it, I remain very familiar with its contents. In fact, it is the one treatise in my life that has resonated with me the most. Perhaps it was because I had just become a monk and was fortunate enough to meet such wonderful masters. The atmosphere and the power of blessing surrounding them were truly unique. So I do have a personal history and extensive experience with these teachings. There are profound principles within them. Today, as we explore Entering the Middle Way, I will share whatever knowledge I can recall from those early years. I will explain it to you. The learning process might seem a bit dry or challenging at times, particularly for those who haven't studied Prajna Paramita Emptiness or have only practiced simpler methods. These teachings might be hard to grasp at first. They might not understand it immediately. But for those who have studied Madhyamaka before, they will find many extremely profound truths here. Studying these is incredibly meaningful. So, it is my hope that whether you are studying the root stanzas of the Middle Way, or the 400 stanzas on the Middle Way, or the adornment of the Middle Way, many of us are missing this key piece, particularly on my part. Throughout the years of sharing the Dharma with you, I haven't actually taught Entering the Middle Way for a long while. Materials from those earlier teachings aren't really available. Many Khenpos, Khenmos, and fellow practitioners have repeatedly asked me to teach entering the middle way, but conditions are quite mysterious. When I wanted to teach it, they weren't ripe. Yet now, as we are all scattered in different places, the right conditions have formed. I have been very eager to teach this year. Perhaps it's because these teachings are so crucial for our time. Nowadays, everyone has such a strong grasping at true existence, a truly intense sense of reification. Under these circumstances, if one can learn something of the Prajna Paramita emptiness, its merit and its significance will be extraordinary and profoundly meaningful. On the other hand, now that I've reached this age, if I don't teach it now, I might not have another opportunity later. So I personally view this teaching of entering the middle way as likely the last time in my life. I simply won't have enough time to teach it all over again. That is unlikely to happen. Therefore, for many of you as well, while you have the opportunity, it is best to study it from beginning to end. Perhaps during this process, relying on the blessings of Master Chandrakirti and the great masters of the past, you will gain an unprecedented realization of Prajna thought. Such a thing can certainly happen. Many great masters of old relied on very simple Prajna teachings or instructions on the luminosity side to ultimately attain true realization. So today, we will share the Madhyamaka principles with everyone, specifically from entering the middle way. When explaining Maitreya entering the middle way, it is like when the earlier great masters would teach. The Buddha taught through the three miraculous displays, Arhats taught through the three purities, and the great Indian masters taught via the 5 criteria for composing a treatise. These traditions exist. As for this Dharma, we can also explain it through those 5 criteria for composing a treatise, just as described in the Adornment of the Middle Way. Who is the author here? It is Master Chandrakirti. What is the content of this Dharma? It is the profound teaching of emptiness. What category does it belong to? It belongs to the Mahayana Dharma. And what is its true essential meaning? What does it primarily concern? It belongs to the Abhidharma, the category of higher knowledge. Who are the intended disciples it guides? Those who have faith in emptiness, as described in the 6th chapter, those who upon hearing of emptiness feel their hair stand on end and are filled with joy. They are the intended disciples here. So before studying this treatise, you should first know that this teaching of Madhyamaka is actually a Mahayana path, and it is immensely meaningful for the world today. Relatively speaking, in the Han Chinese regions, this work is not as well known. Even regarding Master Chandrakirti, there is very little mention in Chinese historical records. Historically, references are scarce. Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, however, is quite different. When we discuss entering the middle way, we must first understand Master Chandrakirti. An introduction to Master Chandrakirti will be provided for everyone a bit later. Master Chandrakirti entered the monastic life at a young age, around the age of 3, as some historical accounts suggest. Later, when he arrived at Nalanda monastery, he was ordained under the known as Chandragomin. He was an expert in both sutra and tantra. Later, among the monastic community, he appeared to do little besides eating and sleeping. He rarely attended the temple services or joined in the communal activities. At that point, many people wanted to expel him. However, Chandragomin would not allow it. Eventually, as a last resort, they had him herd the community's cattle. Yet Master Chandrakirti didn't go out to herd them. Instead, he drew a picture of a cow on a wall. Through that drawing, he manifested a miracle. At the time, milk was needed for the monks to drink. By using that painted cow, he provided milk for everyone. He performed many such miraculous feats, which are also mentioned in the later parts of Entering the Middle Way. So it's important that we all get to know Chandrakirti. He was truly an incredible, highly realized master in the entire tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. Honestly, when you mention Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna, it's like talking about the most authoritative figures in the world today. Throughout the Buddhist world, no matter which school or lineage you follow, if a view comes from Chandrakirti, nobody would even think of denying it. This is why the omniscient Mipham Rinpoche, in his Beacon of Certainty, often highlights Chandrakirti in India and Rongzom Pandita in Tibet. He groups them together for a very good reason. So we should realize that studying Chandrakirti's treatises the way we are doing now is incredibly meaningful. We are very fortunate. Now, When we talk about Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka, we are essentially talking about the thought of Nagarjuna, and Nagarjuna himself was foretold in several sutras. For instance, in the Great Drum Sutra, it says that about 400 years after the Buddha's passing, a monk named Srivatsa would appear to spread the teachings. That was the prophecy. Then, in the Dharma Cloud Sutra, the Buddha predicted that Nagarjuna would spread the Dharma throughout the world 3 times. The first time was when many invaders appeared. He appeared as a Pandita and defeated those opposing views. The second time the sound of Dharma was heard was when Nagarjuna was teaching Madhyamaka philosophy. Every day, 2 young boys would come to listen. It seemed that from the bodies of these 2 boys there was an incredibly sweet fragrance. Later, Nagarjuna asked them about it. They were 2 boys from the Naga palace, and they were carrying the scent of sandalwood. After talking with them, they invited Nagarjuna to the Naga palace. After staying there for many years, he brought back the great Prajna Paramita from the palace and established the teachings of the Middle Way, including the root stanzas of the Middle Way. The third time, Nagarjuna mainly spoke about texts like the collection of praises, in praise of the Dharmadhatu, in praise of the Vajra heart, and so on, these various works of praise. So the Buddha's true Dharma was spread throughout the world by Nagarjuna like the roar of a lion. Now, about Nagarjuna, as some of you might already know, perhaps in the future, I previously translated the preface of the root stanzas of the Middle Way, which should include a brief introduction. To be honest, I don't remember every detail in there clearly, but there's one story I remember quite well. When Nagarjuna was just a small child, right after he was born into a Brahmin family, a fortune teller looked at him and said that he would pass away very soon. However, if they made offerings to 100 Brahmins, he might live for 7 months or 7 days. And if they made offerings to 100 Shramanas, he could live for 7 years. Following the fortune teller's advice, his parents made offerings to both Brahmins and Shramanas, and he lived until he was 7. When he turned 7, his parents said, "We've done all we could for him up to now." Since they knew he was about to leave, they didn't want to see his body, so they sent him away before he died. At age 7, Nagarjuna arrived at Nalanda University. At that time at Nalanda, the great master was Sarahapa. He might be the author of the Songs of Realization and Devotion. He was also known by another name, Rahula. Not the Rahula from the Buddha's time, but a different Rahula. When we pray to the lineage masters of the Vinaya, he is among them. He actually had 2 names. One was Rahula and the other was Sarahapa. Sarahapa was the abbot of Nalanda at the time. When Nagarjuna arrived at age 7, he wanted to be ordained at Nalanda. So Rahula took him in as a disciple and gave him the Amitayus empowerment for long life. And through that, his life was extended. Later, he took full ordination and began to spread the Dharma. Sarahapa knew he was destined to be someone extraordinary, because Sarahapa was not only a founder of Nalanda, but also the one who ordained Nagarjuna, and Sarahapa could already see his incredible potential. Furthermore, in the Lankavatara Sutra and many other sutras, there are prophecies. For instance, in the version translated by Shikshananda, who also translated many other works like the Kshitigarbha Sutra, it says something like, "Mahamati, you should know that after the Buddha, the Sugata, passes into Nirvana, in the future there will be one who upholds my teachings." And who is this person? He will be from South India with glory in his name and known as Nagarjuna. He will destroy the views of existence and non-existence, and in this world he will reveal my supreme Mahayana teachings. Ultimately, he will reach the level of supreme joy and attain the land of bliss. This is what is often cited from the Lankavatara Sutra. The original text explicitly mentions a monk of great renown from South India. This scriptural citation also exists in the Tibetan tradition. It can be said that Bodhisattva Nagarjuna received the authentic prophecy of the Buddha himself. According to many historians and relevant historical records, Nagarjuna actually appeared in this world after the Buddha's parinirvana, roughly 400 years later. Did Master Chandrakirti ever meet Nagarjuna? Some believe that Chandrakirti was a direct lineage disciple of Nagarjuna. However, those in the Sakya school, like Gorampa, do not hold this view. Based on certain passages in Chandrakirti's own treatises, he states, after Nagarjuna left, then a Sangha, then Vasubandhu, after Asanga, and after Dignaga and others had passed, I began to propagate the Madhyamaka Dharma. Judging from Chandrakirti's own perspective, he might not have actually met him. There was likely a gap of at least several centuries between Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. Yet some masters believe otherwise. For instance, in one of Atisha's treatises, it refers to Chandrakirti as a disciple of Nagarjuna. Because of this, some historians argue that Nagarjuna must have personally guided Chandrakirti. There is such a tradition, but in reality there was likely a significant period of time between them. I recall when Sakya Pandita came to the Han regions, someone asked him, "Did Chandrakirti ever truly meet Nagarjuna?" Sakya Pandita replied that they had not. "If they never met," the person asked, "then why did Atisha say that Chandrakirti was Nagarjuna's disciple? What does that mean?" In his explanation, he said there are actually two types of disciples. One is a direct personal disciple, and the other is a lineage descendant, one who receives the teaching indirectly through the lineage. There are these two cases. So when we say disciple, it doesn't necessarily mean they met in person. There is such an interpretation. Looking at the relevant historical data, it is likely that Nagarjuna belonged to an earlier era, and Chandrakirti appeared in the world much later, so they might not have met face to face. However, that he realized Nagarjuna's ultimate intent is beyond any doubt. Therefore, in our process of study, if we study with great sincerity, we will receive the blessings of Master Chandrakirti. That was a brief overview of the history regarding Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. Next, let's briefly discuss entering the middle way. Regarding this treatise, Entering the Middle Way, we look at the title, the principles, and the meaning of the work. It is divided into several aspects according to the outline. The title is primarily Madhyamaka. In Sanskrit, Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka means the middle way. Avatara means entering. Nama means titled as or called. It seems Master Dharmakirti used different characters for Nama across various treatises. This is perhaps unavoidable. Sometimes when I'm translating, I forget what I used before and end up using different characters. So the meaning is entering the middle way. The word treatise might not be explicitly written here, but entering and middle are there. Shastra, treatise, is the same as the commentaries we usually explain. Here the focus is on Madhyamaka. As you all know, why do we study Madhyamaka? To study Madhyamaka is to study Prajna, wisdom. The name Madhyamaka can refer to the expressed meaning and the expressing words. These are the two aspects. The expressed meaning of Madhyamaka is divided into ground, path, and fruition. Ground Madhyamaka, path Madhyamaka, and fruition Madhyamaka. For example, the ground Madhyamaka is the non-duality of the two truths. It is the ground of the indivisible two truths. Then path Madhyamaka is the non-duality of the two accumulations. Fruition Madhyamaka is the non-duality of the two bodies. In effect, ground, path, and fruition refer to the indivisibility of these three stages. The expressing Madhyamaka, the words, can be divided into scriptural Madhyamaka and Shastra Madhyamaka. Scriptural Madhyamaka includes all the Prajna Paramita Sutras, the 12 large volumes of Prajna, the extensive, intermediate, and concise Prajna Sutras, that is the aspect of the Buddha's sutras. Then there is the Shastra aspect, primarily the Madhyamaka treatises. The one who unerringly explains the Buddha's intent here is Bodhisattva Nagarjuna. Regarding the treatises composed by Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, they serve as the quintessential representation of Madhyamaka. Of course, Nagarjuna's works are vast and numerous. However, generally speaking, we refer to Nagarjuna's 6 collections of reasoning, or 5 collections. In this regard, throughout various Tibetan Buddhist discourses, there exist several differing viewpoints. Originally, I thought for this time that discussing these divergent views might not be entirely necessary, since everyone is so busy with their lives, you might not be particularly concerned with them. Focusing directly on how Madhyamaka benefits you personally might seem better. Yet, I reconsidered. Since we are embarking on the study of Madhyamaka, some people do enjoy the analytical side. Especially in the Tibetan tradition, we value analysis, debate, and meticulous deconstruction. In this aspect, it is indeed quite distinct from other traditions. So I can provide a brief analysis for everyone. In fact, regarding this topic, I mentioned it before when I taught the root verses of the Middle Way, and perhaps during the teachings on the 3 types of vows. Whether it is The sixfold or fivefold collections has always been a subject of varying opinions within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. These differing views are frequently discussed in debating courtyards and among the learned scholars. So I think if you are to study Madhyamaka not knowing how many works Chandrakirti wrote or how many Nagarjuna wrote, that wouldn't be ideal. If someone asks, what are the works of Master Chandrakirti? You should know of the Entering the Middle Way we are studying now and the Clear Words I briefly mentioned last time. These two are vital for unerringly explaining Nagarjuna's views. There is also his great commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. Master Chandrakirti has a commentary on that, which is available among the treatises, and his commentary on the 60 stanzas of reasoning. The commentaries on the root verses of the Middle Way include the Clear Words and the Entering the Middle Way, along with the commentary on the 60 stanzas of reasoning. These are the representative works of Master Chandrakirti. I once thought about whether I could, including the great commentary on Entering the Middle Way and the great commentary on the 60 stanzas of reasoning. I have considered all of these, but in a short human life it may not be possible. It would be very interesting to have them translated in the future. I have personally studied these treatises. Now, what are Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka works? As I mentioned, the sixfold or fivefold collections. And what do sixfold and fivefold mean? In the early translation school, Nyingma, there was a scholar named Macha Changchup Chondru. He was a truly remarkable and great scholar. In his commentary on the root verses of the Middle Way, titled something like Saka, the Shastra of Rationality, till he mentions the following. Nagarjuna actually has the 6 collections of reasoning. These are primarily the root verses of the Middle Way, the 60 stanzas of reasoning, the 70 stanzas on emptiness, the dispeller of disputes, the treatise on pulverization, and the establishment of convention. Thus, there are 6 collections of reasoning. Within these 6, he categorized them as follows. The primary Madhyamaka works consist of the root verses of the Middle Way, which is the principal treatise. Then the 60 stanzas of reasoning, which is like the body of the teaching. These are the 2 root Madhyamaka works. Following these are 4 branch Madhyamaka works. For example, the dispeller of disputes was expanded from the examination of conditions in the root verses of the Middle Way, and the 70 stanzas on emptiness was expanded from the examination of conditioned phenomena in the root verses of the Middle Way. As for establishment of convention and the treatise on pulverization, they deal with other aspects likely expanded from the root verses of the Middle Way as a whole. Thus, Macha believed Nagarjuna had 6 collections of reasoning, namely the 2 root treatises, the 60 stanzas of reasoning, and the root stanzas of the Middle Way, and the 4 branch treatises. He included establishment of convention in the list, totaling 6 works. This was his view. Later, Tsongkhapa held different views on 2 of these. In his general commentary on Prajna Paramita, the Golden Garland, referencing Macha's perspective, he acknowledged the fivefold collection. Then, in the Elucidation of the Intent, the commentary on the Entering the Middle Way, or another work, in this context, Tsongkhapa did not include establishment of convention. Instead, he listed the 60 stanzas of reasoning, the 70 stanzas on emptiness, the root stanzas of the Middle Way, the treatise on pulverization, and the dispeller of disputes, and then added the Nagarjuna's precious garland. He included the Nagarjuna's precious garland, but excluded establishment of convention. Later, the omniscient Gorampa, a great master of the Sakya school, wrote the general meaning of Madhyamaka. In this general meaning, he refuted both of their viewpoints. The first argument states that Macha's 6 collections of reasoning is logically unsound. This is because regarding the establishment of convention, never mind Tibetan areas, it's uncertain if it ever even existed in India. In the conclusion of the Clear Words, when Master Chandrakirti lists the Madhyamaka works he studied, such as the root stanzas of the Middle Way and the 70 stanzas on emptiness, he makes no mention of establishment of convention at all. Therefore, its inclusion is unreasonable. Establishment of convention should not be added to the collection. Gorampa also refutes Tsongkhapa's view, arguing that the Nagarjuna's precious garland should not be included in the 6 collections of reasoning either. This This is because the Nagarjuna's precious garland belongs to the collection of instructions, not the collection of reasonings. The reason for this distinction is also evident in the clear words. The Nagarjuna's precious garland consists of advice given to a king. It was never categorized as a pure work of Madhyamaka reasoning, so both of these inclusions are logically flawed. His own perspective is proclaimed based on the commentary of the clear words. According to Khenpo Tepa's viewpoint, his stance is quite similar to that of Gorampa. And what is the reason for this similarity? Originally, omniscient Longchenpa and the great scholar Sonam Chokdrup did mention the 6 collections of reasoning in their works as seen in other various treatises. However, Khenpo Tepa follows Mipham Rinpoche's view found in the Sakya Queries and Answers. There is a short text in his collected works where the following view is presented. It is more reasonable to define Madhyamaka as 5 collections. Despite the 2 differing traditions, the 5 collections is more logical. And why is this deemed reasonable? Generally, when establishing a philosophical school, one must first refute the views of others, then establish one's own position, and finally dispel any remaining disputes. These 3 are the fundamental rules for any debater. Following this logic, the treatise on pulverization was primarily written to refute the non-Buddhist schools, specifically the 16 categories of reasoning of the Nyaya school. It engages in debate there, so Nagarjuna first refuted the Nyaya school and other relevant Indian schools by writing the treatise on pulverization. Then he established his own school through the root wisdom and the 60 stanzas. The root stanzas of the middle way, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, focuses on the refutation aspect of Buddhist Madhyamaka thought. To negate the existence of any phenomenon, all these phenomena as neither coming nor going, neither arising nor ceasing, etc. All of these are refuted by transcending the 4 extremes and 8 elaborations. Thus, the root stanzas of the middle way establishes the school primarily through refutation. As for the 60 stanzas of reasoning, it shows that all things are interdependent and establishes the view that reality is like a dream or illusion. It speaks from the perspective of establishment, so when setting up one's own system, it can be built from both refutation and establishment. Thirdly, to address various remaining disputes, he utilized the Dispeller of Disputes and the 70 stanzas on emptiness. Therefore, according to the views of Gorampa and Mipham Rinpoche, the 5 collections is a more fitting classification. The reason it is fitting is also supported by evidence in the clear words. At that time, Master Chandrakirti said that he had diligently studied and engaged with Nagarjuna's 5 collections of reasoning, namely the root stanzas of the middle way, the 60 stanzas of reasoning, the treatise on pulverization, the Dispeller of Disputes, and the 70 stanzas on emptiness. This aligns with Chandrakirti's own perspective as well as our own school's philosophy. So within this particular viewpoint, even though there are various other assertions, I have seen works by the Karmapas, such as the earlier Karmapa Rangjung Dorje, and relevant Madhyamaka commentaries that also accept the 5 collections of reasoning. In this way, essentially, Mipham Rinpoche of our Nyingma school, along with the Sakya and Kagyu schools and many other great masters, all agree that the 5-fold collection of reasonings is more appropriate. This not only matches Chandrakirti's perspective, but also fits our own philosophical framework perfectly. So everyone should also observe the history of our predecessors just mentioned. In fact, the views on Nagarjuna's 6 collections of reasoning and 5 collections were what we were all quite interested in at that time. But for many years now, I haven't thought much about them. 6 collections or 5 collections, either is fine. As long as they eliminate the afflictions within our continuum, there should not be a very large difference. This is primarily what is taught regarding Madhyamaka. Then, when Master Chandrakirti wrote on Madhyamaka, it was titled Entering the Middle Way. Middle means the middle way, Madhyamaka. Entering means the act of approaching or entering. How does one enter? It is entered through 2 aspects, the profound and the vast. The profound aspect is primarily entered through emptiness. Master Chandrakirti himself states in his treatise, the profound is emptiness. Other qualities are the vast. Knowing these 2, one gains these merits. Using this reasoning to provide the explanation. So the following treatise should also be clear Therefore, entering through the profound way is discussed throughout entering the middle way. Especially when discussing the sixth bhumi, he uses analytical methods to examine arising from self, from other, from both, or without cause. In this way, it is impossible for all things to arise, providing many reasons to determine emptiness. Then how does one enter from the vast aspect? Although entering the middle way itself does not say much, in Master Nagarjuna's root stanzas of the middle way, it also does not discuss much of the vast aspect. However, some wise ones believe that while for entering the profound, entering the middle way is primary, for the vast, it is the precious garland, because in the precious garland, the 3 stages of ordinary beings and 10 bhumis of bodhisattvas are all discussed quite in detail, so one enters through both the profound and the vast. What does this mean? It means that if we study entering the middle way, on one hand we deeply understand the meaning of emptiness, which is the viewpoint of Master Nagarjuna. On the other hand, we also deeply understand the vast Bodhisattva trainings of 5 paths and 10 bhumis. This is also the intent of Master Nagarjuna. So we enter through scriptural authority and reasoning, or through scriptural authority and pith instructions. Anyone who has studied entering the middle way will surely master Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka thought and the vast meaning of Nagarjuna, so its mode of entry is roughly explained in this way. Next, we discuss the translator's homage to Manjushri Kumara. This translation salutation indicates that, according to some historical accounts, this text was already translated during Guru Padmasambhava's time. There are some accounts like this. But this version has never been found. History does have such a claim. It said it was translated during the early translation period. But in actual history, later around the 11th century, a translator named Patsab Nyima Drak did the translation. And during the translation process, this was actually making the translator's homage. At that time, Patsab went to India and later went to Kashmir. He studied for 20 years under a Pandita. When he returned to Tibet with the translation, at that time, the Madhyamaka Svatantrika view was quite prevalent in Tibet. Works like The Ornament of the Middle Way and Kamalashila's Madhyamaka were relatively flourishing. At that time, Tibet did not have the explanation, and many people tried to stop him. There was a great master named Sharawa. Someone sent Entering the Middle Way to the then famous Venerable Sharawa. When Venerable Sharawa saw Entering the Middle Way, he prayed very devoutly to Translator Patsab and the Entering the Middle Way. He was particularly delighted and very much approved of it. From then on, Entering the Middle Way gradually spread throughout the world. So this translator's homage was likely placed there by Patsab because Patsab's history is also recorded in the Blue Annals. And it's also in the history of Master Bhutan. Actually, he was a contemporary of the great translator Loken Rinchen Zangpo and of Atisha during the later transmission period. He was also a truly remarkable great translator. There are 2 Tibetan translations of Entering the Middle Way. There is another translation called Nagcho. Both versions exist in Tibetan, and then this one by Nyima Drak. It was likely translated by Nyima Drak. In any case, both of these exist in Tibetan. Master Fazun likely followed the translation of Nyima Drak. Fazun translated it at the Sino-Tibetan Buddhist Institute, and he was teaching it to everyone. In the Han region, later it seems Master Longlian, including Fazun himself, taught while translating, and also Venerable Yen Pei. Many great masters also had commentaries, but when they taught Entering the Middle Way, I always feel it wasn't like the Tibetan ones, the way some great masters taught it, how to enter the root stanzas of the Middle Way. Its relationship with the root stanzas of the Middle Way was basically not discussed much. When seeing how some people explain it regarding how to enter Madhyamaka through the Diamond Sutra, through the Heart Sutra to enter, actually, if it is explained this way, it is perhaps not very reasonable, because between Nagarjuna and Master Chandrakirti, there is a lineage of very great blessings, and between the Buddha and Nagarjuna, there is such a blessed lineage. Actually, if we truly want to understand Prajna thought, we should first understand what is closest to us, relying on the instructions of these lineage masters to understand the intent of Master Chandrakirti. And then Master Chandrakirti, at the end of Entering the Middle Way, will also mention He completely realized the intent of Nagarjuna, and Nagarjuna completely realized the intent of the Buddha. So for us ordinary people who read sutras directly later, sometimes the meaning of the sutras is extremely profound. Generally, one might not necessarily understand. One needs a key of pith instructions, and these keys of pith instructions were passed to us by generations of Madhyamaka masters. So I also hope that everyone, through this study of Madhyamaka, although in our current era people are indeed very interested in fragmented culture, regarding such profound principles, perhaps everyone is just flying a plane. One day when we were chatting together, there was a person. I asked him how his driving was. He said he was driving very well. He then continued, "I am also very good at flying a plane." A Khenpo nearby asked curiously, "How do you fly a plane?" He said, "Usually during class I am quite good at flying planes." Later everyone understood what he meant. So in our current era, let alone Madhyamaka, even basic worldly topics, some longer Buddhist lessons, might not necessarily enter the heart. But regardless, studying Madhyamaka is very important. Here it primarily discusses the translator's homage. The translator paid homage to Manjushri. Manjushri is primarily from the aspect of wisdom. He unimpededly understands all phenomena. Dharmadhatu is equal and of one taste, free from all elaborations. This is termed manju, when. Then shru, shu, means both omniscient wisdom and wisdom knowing reality as it is are perfected, extending as far as the realm of space, benefiting sentient beings spontaneously. Perfecting self-benefit and benefit for others is called shri, in shu, shu. Such manju, when, and shri, shu, are non-dual, appearing in the form of a 10th ground bodhisattva, but he still appears very young. Without aging, he is called Kumara. So we generally say, because he dwells within the Dharmata, he remains youthful forever without decay. Therefore, Manjushri has already realized the nature of the Dharmadhatu without increase or decrease. Therefore, he can be called Manjushri Kumara. Before such Bodhisattva Manjushri, the translator offered his homage. So all of you present here starting today, prepare to study entering the middle way. During the learning process, pray sincerely to Master Chandrakirti, because sometimes blessings are quite inconceivable. Of course, just praying without reading or thinking certainly won't work. On the other hand, pray to Manjushri and pray to Master Chandrakirti. Perhaps in this short life one can realize the profound Madhyamaka teachings that are free from the 4 extremes and 8 elaborations. All right, we will stop here today.
Sonandai Prajna Tonani Jana Pasi Jirgana Jirano Chupai Chupun Solen Droa Droa
Larung Gar Badma Sodargye Larung Gar Badma Sodargye Larung Gar Badma Sodargye